Welcome to the Spawn Chunks, episode number 187 for Monday, April 4th, 2022. My name is Johnny, but the internet knows me as Pixel Riffs, and joining me, as always, is one Joel Duggan at a time. Hi, Joel.
That feels like my progress on the Citadel this past weekend. We'll get into that in a minute.
Rate of one Joel per Joel.
If you want to hear a little bit more about what we've been up to on the weekend, including exploring new games via streams, crossover gaming demographics, etc., you should listen to The Render Distance. That is the extended version of the podcast that Johnny and I record every week. You can get that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks by becoming a member. And it is the first episode of the month. And we like to send out a huge thank you to all of our patrons for your ongoing support. That support this month also means that coming later on, our Discord members can look forward to the 2022 Q1 quarterly hangout, the April Minecraft hangout, we're still above that goal, and of course the chunk mail dispenser later on this month. For the quarterly hangout and the Minecraft hangout, you can just look for times and dates in the Discord over the month as we try to figure out when those are going to be scheduled. But don't worry, you'll get a tag. We'll be announcing it in the announcements channel in the Discord.
And very excited to hear what everybody gets up to in Minecraft for the month of April. The Hangouts are one of my new favorite things that we're doing, actually. So really excited to have another one lined up for April. Speaking of which, what have you been up to in Minecraft this week? How's the Citadel?
So this week I have been working on what I hope was going to be the final streams on the Lowtown build that I've been doing. And as often happens in Minecraft, things just take longer than you expect. I have been working on inside details and builds. I've been using my tables and chairs data pack as well as the mini blocks data pack from Vanilla Tweaked, and decorating things like little bakeries. This is like the poorer part of town. So the good news is it's fairly simple inside. It's like bed, chest, you're kind of done. Maybe a chair, unless the build has a very specific use. I had a storehouse in the middle of the town that needed some extra things. So did some cool stuff with having a big crate with like putting O's on signs to look like rivets or nails in the side of crate supports. Beehives look great as storage things. So exploring all kinds of different stuff there. Also working on the road and trying to make that feel beaten down, but also stone, so it's not all dirt anymore. That is the kind of thing where I just there was more decisions that I was prepared to make this weekend. So the road and a couple of other details on the street market are coming later. However, I am really happy with some of the off-the-cuff decisions. So I went into building the street market with no plan. I didn't have any references. I just kind of said, I've seen these built by people before, but I don't have an image in front of me. And I included a couple of market stalls that were on angles. And we're talking, they're 3 or 5 blocks wide. So I was pretty impressed that I was able to pull that off and still have it look good. Was able to work in some red sandstone and acacia. So still like earth tony colors, but not everything is brown, which makes me happy.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I worked on was bringing in, I guess it's a half moat. It wasn't planned, but I had this big swash of green between the South Gate and Lowtown that just looked like it made it easy to get into the town. Like you just kind of go around the corner, swim for 2 feet and you're inside. So I decided to create like a bit of a half moat that makes the road into Lowtown or into West Hill feel a little bit more special. It has, it looks like something you could fall off of. It doesn't look like something that you can cross very easily. I mean, you can as a player, but it doesn't look it. And so I had a lot of fun adding some greenery, decorating the riverbank, using some different soul sand and soul soil for mud, and I had a really good time. It just took a really long time on stream because you're dealing with you have to have an inventory of 30 blocks on you to do most of the stuff. So there's a lot of running back and forth. Now thankfully you can't see it in the renders that I shared in our live chat, but thankfully my shulker box island was directly under the arch of the South Gate, so I didn't have far to go, but I got real sick of running back and forth. I just, as short as it was for distance, I'm just I'm kind of done with this now. You get all the way over to some build, which is not long. It's 50 blocks away and you're like, I forgot grass. Back I go. So that kind of stuff took a while, but it was fun. There's a really nice feeling when you get a section of this kind of a build done, and then you're walking back and forth across it, and it's got all those details in it, you're like, okay, this feels pretty good. Except for when you fake yourself out with a faux creeper build. So I wanted to make a fishing dock or someplace. Somebody suggested like it looks like a spot where someone might go to do their laundry in the river, and I thought that's a really cool idea. I should make it look like it's functional. So I put a fence post with a spruce mini block on the top of it, and at nighttime it looks like a creeper. Like
right, yeah, I can see that.
Corner of your eye, you just like, what? Oh no, it's fine. It's fine. It's not. It's a thing that I built 10 minutes ago. But yeah. I caught myself at least twice on stream doing like the double take. There's no hiding it. The mouse totally went, what? So yeah, it was a good weekend though.
There's a pretty straightforward, like, instinctive identifier of a creeper. It's thin, it doesn't have arms, it's got a head. That sounds like a creeper to me. Wait a second. Yeah. It's fun. Now, I like the screenshots you've got here. There's like a pulley system to transfer like a crate across the half moat kind of area, I assume you were talking about. And I really like that. It kind of reminds me, one of my favorite comfort movies is A Knight's Tale, the Heath Ledger movie, and just the scene towards the end of that where they are ostensibly crossing the channel to go back to London, but in the fiction of this world they basically have like a raft that is pulled along like a ferry kind of thing on this chain that a dude is just like heaving over his shoulder, and it allows them to make the crossing from Europe, where most of the movie takes place, back to England. And it's just this big long chain that the guy is carrying, and it kind of feels a bit like that, the kind of the medieval technology of it all being just a long chain between two giant kind of pulley systems really makes a lot of sense. And that looks like really appropriate technology for the era you're trying to invoke, while still feeling like technology to the people who are there. That's cool.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I was really proud of that build. It's one of those things that just works enough in Minecraft for it to be something that is sold visually, especially if you're not too close to it, because it just feels like the weight of the crate needs the heavy pulleys, which are grindstones. People use grindstones for pulleys and stuff all the time. But yeah, I wanted something there because that's natural land. So the river actually makes this big snaky curve around that area. And I wanted a gate there for the town because it made sense for the inside the town for people to have access to like the riverbank, which that side of the river hasn't been decorated yet. But I didn't want to put a bridge there because that defeats the purpose of having a main gate with like a portcullis and like all the support and things like that. So I wanted to have something there that says, well, it makes sense that there would be access to crossing, but maybe it's not people, maybe it's just goods and things, because like the people that are fishermen and stuff in this low town, maybe they're shipping stuff, because the other side of that gate on the main town actually is very close to the East Market. So like maybe the fish or the baked goods or whatever is going up the road into the market. So I don't know. It's not all like completely worked out, but I try to have a lot of intention behind everything that's in the build. But thanks, man. I appreciate that.
Yeah, just those little details often really make the story of an area like that, for sure.
So what have you been up to, my friend?
This week, I have done all of the progression stuff in Minecraft that I've been putting off for a little while. So I fought the Wither, I got myself a beacon, I've done a beacon strip mine, at stone level, not at deep slate level, obviously, but that was a fun way of opening up the conversation about whether strip mining for stone is really worth it in terms of acquiring resources when you know you're not going to get as many diamonds as you do further down in the world. And spoiler alert, I think it's still worth it. I did a bit of looking around at all of the ores and stuff that were out there, but there's a lot of stuff that you can still find at, Y heights of 7 or 8 is roughly where I was because of the transition into the deep slate layers. So I ended up taking a couple of screenshots, which maybe we'll share in the show notes. I'm not sure quite how illustrative some of this stuff is, but there's still diamond ore down there, and I managed to uncover maybe 5 or 6 different veins of diamond ore. It got me maybe 17 or 18 blocks of diamond ore all told. So I think that's still pretty good. And you're also getting a decent amount of iron, some coal, where the coal has started to drop off when you get that low in the world. But then there's gold, there's copper, there's like a whole bunch of resources that are still there. And some of that stuff is stuff that tapers off as you get further down into the world as well. So having done the moss mining chunk where I dug out like a large area vertically, this was a chance to dig out a large area horizontally, and had a lot of fun with that. Managed to get myself a ton of cobblestone, which I've mentioned before is something that I still think I need to go and periodically mine, because without that, I don't have the materials to make redstone components, which can't be made with deep slate, and we don't tend to mine as much in the stone layers anymore. So managed to fill up my storage system with cobblestone, with natural stone, a few of the decorative stone types as well, and got a decent amount of ores to uncover just for the sake of finding out if they are still there. That necessitated making a shulker box unloader to drop everything off, because I had about 9 double chests of resources by the time I was done. So I was transferring all of that back to my storage system in shulker boxes, and thought I should probably have a redstone system to unload all of this, to make it all less like I have to jump up onto this very temporary platform and unload everything into the chest so it makes its way into the storage system. So I was able to get a few different projects out of just the idea that I got myself a beacon at that stage. Now what do I do with it?
And shulker box unloaders, it's been a while since I've done one, but you can, depending on what you put underneath them, you can empty them at speed, I think, right? Can you put a hopper minecart underneath a shulker box?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely you can. You've just got to make sure that the hopper minecart drains into something else of equivalent speed, otherwise it's not going to be super worth it. I think if you've got it over a pad of like 4 hoppers that are all draining down into different things, then absolutely you can. But in my case, it's more about just having something that will unload stuff in the background while I run around and do other things at my base. So it's
so speed not super important.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, I have plenty of time to just hang around and tinker with design stuff in that storage room still. And I spent half of the time that this was unloading making a shulker box loader in the basement, where all of the overflow from the storage system goes, where there are items that aren't necessarily stored in the bulk storage stuff that's actually got filters attached to it. And that's now got a shulker box loader, so that when all of the miscellaneous items and bits of like kelp and quartz and, you know, villager workstations and all of that stuff ends up going into that chest, I can now eject it as a shulker box and carry that around to the different cubby holes in my manual storage system and drop everything off in there. So that's now feeling a little bit more automated. It's something I'm a lot happier with. And it was good to kind of revise that stuff, because I expect I'm going to need to make a lot more shulker box loaders in the near future.
Nice. I'm trying to think about the last time that I dug out like a chunk, like not a chunk, but chunks like that at level. I want to say it was my witch farm. And I don't think I've had to do it since. So you're probably good for a while. I'm
going to be good for a while. I think if I was planning a larger project like a castle, I'd be doing stuff like this on the regular to get a lot of stone. But a lot of my building this time around in this world has skewed a little bit more kind of modern. I'm leaning that way at least, and the stuff that I'm building in my dripstone cave base isn't going to rely heavily on the stone palette, because there's already stone everywhere. I want to build stuff that stands out, not stuff that blends in. So I think, for now, I'm at least going to be focusing on gathering a few other materials here and there. As far as other materials go, though, a lot of them are now represented in the room above my storage system, which is kind of where the shulker box loader was built. But I wanted something to decorate this room, and I'm planning on it being like a trophy room for my achievements throughout the series, whether it's, that's where the dragon egg is going to go. I'm probably going to put my first wooden pickaxe in there. We'll commemorate some of the trickier advancements and stuff like that. But I wanted to do something community-focused as well. And in the past, I've done fundraising streams for various charities. This last weekend, I guess Thursday, I suppose, one of the streamers who I follow online runs a place in Northern Ireland called the Belfast Trans Resource Centre, and she's been running that for a few years, and was doing a fundraiser to reopen after their closure due to COVID. So I helped raise a bit of money for that, and when people donated, I was having them basically DM me their receipt on Twitter to show that they donated as like proof, and then I was choosing a block of their choice to put up on the wall and create basically just this like wall of donations in block form, and with people's signs, kind of names up on signs and that kind of thing. And so now I've got this wall that's made out of a ton of different blocks and banners and items and like amethyst crystals growing from it and stuff. And I'm really happy with it. It's a really nice, colorful piece that I'm going to have up in there for the remainder of the series. And I think it was really cool to do some, not necessarily like design, because I couldn't anticipate what people's blocks were going to be, but trying to space them out a little bit so it looks like this big jumble of color, almost like, graffiti style, where the colors all just kind of leap out at you. So I had a lot of fun doing that, and people were pretty inventive in their block choices as well. There were some tricky ones in there. Luckily, I had a bunch of them already, and people were kind enough not to say, like, full netherite block or whatever. But there was almost a bidding war for a wither skull at one point, which was pretty funny, but there's a couple of extras in there, including one that's a water source block, which it turned out was quite difficult to attach a sign to, but I ended up waterlogging a trapdoor in the end, and that worked out pretty well.
That's great. I mean, it looks fantastic, really well balanced. Like, you did a really good job of, like you said, spreading out, like the yellow blocks are all not next to one another, like that kind of stuff. It still feels, and you're right, the graffiti is what I thought of. Like, it wasn't the word that came to my mind, but it's like, this looks familiar somehow. Like, the feeling of looking at it reminds me of walking by some of the warehouse walls down by the train tracks here in Dartmouth that have a lot of graffiti and stuff on them by different artists. And while they're all vastly different, you sort of still get the same vibe as you walk by,
Yeah.
Very, very cool. It's too bad that you had to use signs and everything. Like, it's too bad there's not a way to put names on things in Minecraft without the signs, because then it would be really vibrant, because you wouldn't have the signs covering things.
Yeah, I was trying to pick signs that fit the materials as best I could, or stuff that would stand out against the background and still kind of give it like a bit of a pop of color. But I think a lot of them, knowing what we know about Minecraft and being as in-depth as my community is, we know what most of these blocks are to begin with. And I was planning on maybe seeding a little bit more of the azalea leaves and stuff in there just to kind of fill the whole thing out, because immediately to the right of that, if you turn 90 degrees, I've got a moss wall that's got copper in the background, and so there's moss and azalea leaves and a few other different types of leaf in there, that it kind of gives this whole place a kind of modern green feel that really suits the exterior of the build, which is a bit more modern and kind of like clean lines and curves. And so I think inside it's really nice to have this stuff. And you can see this through the glass from the outside as well. So it's super nice to have a pop of color in there. The signs don't render in at a certain distance as well. So I think you can actually see some of this stuff from a little further away without the signs getting in the way. The last major event this week was on Friday, which was April Fool's Day. I was invited by Bruno Danoy and Ulraf to participate in a special bonus live stream where we were checking out the one block at a time snapshot, which we'll cover in the news. So I'll say a bit more about that later. Cubfan135 also joined us, and that was hilarious. So if anybody hasn't caught that yet, there's an edited version of that up on my YouTube channel. The full version is also on my VOD's channel, and it was just non-stop laughter from start to finish. But more to say about that as we get into the news. So Mojang Studios released a new astonishing update on April 1st. Snapshots 22W13, one block at a time, was added. We'll have a link to the article for that in our show notes. This was, of course, the April Fool's Snapshot. And there's a YouTube video accompanying it titled Leaked Mojang Studios Video Reveals New Minecraft Java Snapshot. It's a lot of very funny footage of Ulraf, I think, basically, hacking his way through a new concept for Minecraft, which was taking the idea of players affecting one block at a time, which Jeb talked about at the most recent Minecraft Live, taking that concept a little too literally. So the changelog is that they fixed all inventory issues by removing the inventory and subsequently made the whole world into a player inventory space with up to 14 quintillion inventory slots. They also removed experience and enchanting while they were at it, fixed the MC-4 bug by having no items on the ground. The drops are now droppier. The chest excitement factor is now improved. The ability to throw stuff was added. Glass was 50% more realistic when thrown. They've added wrestling moves as an alternative to leashes, reworked the combat experience because it was hard to create a more immersive gameplay experience, and there are a few sneaky blocks in there as well. We'll unpack a bit more of that a bit later because I have some fun stuff to share about this. But moving on to the real snapshot, Minecraft Java Edition Snapshot 22W13A was released just before the April Fool's Snapshot, actually. which adds the Allay mob and ancient cities back into Minecraft Java Edition with this snapshot. Allays, as I'm sure you folks are aware, are going to collect all the surrounding items that match the item they're holding. Allays like a player who hands them an item and bring the items they collect back to their liked player. If the Allay hears a note block play, that note block becomes the Allay's favorite for 30 seconds, and it will stay near the note block for the duration to bring the collected items there instead of to the player. Interacting with an Allay with an empty hand removes the item the Allay is holding, so you can take back those valuable items, and you can currently find them in Pillager Outposts and Woodland Mansions. Ancient cities now spawn in the Deep Dark biome again. In chests guarded by Skulk Sensors and Shriekers, you can find a new Swift Sneaking enchantment. You can also find the mysterious new Reinforced Deep Slate block there, which still cannot be obtained in any way in Survival. And you'll also find that mobs do not spawn there, give or take the Warden. There are a few differences with Ancient Cities compared to the Deep Dark experimental snapshot where they were first introduced. A few adjustments have been made with new and tweaked structures, which we'll talk about a little later. Loot tables have also been adjusted, so the Ancient City loot is looking maybe a little more favourable for players. This includes a separate loot table for icebox structures. There are changes in 22W13A as well, including that the recipe for a minecart with a chest, or with a furnace, or a TNT, or with a hopper are now shapeless recipes. They're no longer required to be made exactly the right way. When broken, each minecart variant drops itself as an item instead of splitting into two items like the chest and the minecart as separate items. Only wool and wool carpets will now block the sounds coming from note blocks. They've added a new advancement trigger, kill mob near Skulk Catalyst. There are a few changes to Skulk Shrieker block states, and they've renamed some in-game events to be more consistent grammatically with a few other bits and pieces already in the code.
The Bedrock Edition beta and preview 1.18.30.32.33. The Bedrock beta preview article will be linked in our show notes, posted on Minecraft.net this week instead of posted on the Feedback Hub, presumably because it is a big update with the Warden and Ancient Cities being added. Most of the additions mirror what we've covered already recently on the Spawn Chunks in the Java Snapshots. However, it's worth noting that some known issues like ancient city structures can extend far beyond the Deep Dark biome, even though they start there, and aquifers can sometimes intersect with ancient city structures and submerge or destroy big chunks of the structure. Gameplay fixes of note include that mobs with knockback resistance, example the Ravager or Zoglin, now receive less knockback when hit by an Iron Golem, fixed end city feature generation in the end. Again, you can review the full article on Minecraft.net.
So let's talk about the snapshots and I guess to a certain extent the Bedrock beta first, because then I'll unpack some of the stuff that we found out in the April Fool's snapshot, which, I don't know if you ended up looking at the April Fool's snapshot much.
No, I don't know. I'm sure I've mentioned this on the podcast before. I'm not a big April Fool's fan. Never have been. Specifically the internet on April Fool's. And I want to say I do enjoy the fact that Mojang fully embraces the April Fool's thing because it's obviously a joke.
Yeah,
they're not trying to fool anybody. They're just having some fun. I
saw a really good tweet about this that I've tried to internalize what it said, because it was something like, there are two things that happen on April Fools. There are jokes and there are people telling plausible lies. And that's the second one is the one I don't like. It's the kind of like, basically you're just telling a lie and then being like, haha, gotcha. Whereas the joke side of things is clearly what Mojang is trying to embrace. And yeah, they're doing everything very tongue in cheek. So I think the April Fool's snapshot was kind of pitch perfect this year. But anyway, let's go back to 22W13A and talk about the Allay and the Ancient City stuff. What do you want to dive into first?
So let's start with the Allay, because I did watch a bunch of Cubpan, who you mentioned earlier, exploring the Allay and trying to see what different mechanics and what, kind of really testing the limits. And I was kind of coming to the same conclusion that he was, and that is it seems cool. It looks like a cute companion, but I feel like it needs a little bit more development before it really becomes useful for the player, which I know opens the can of worms of like, does everything have to be useful? Can it not just be a fun companion? But I would draw, your attention to things like dogs that attack skeletons, cats that scare away creepers. Like there is still some useful in the other companions. Parrots, not so much. But with the Allay, the idea behind them is the fact that they can collect these items and then take them to a note block that can hopefully then be collected by the player somehow. The first thing that I noticed was that the toss mechanic, while funny, is wholly inaccurate.
Yeah.
You might as well be it might as well be called the barf mechanic, because it just kind of like walks up to the note block and kind of goes like, this is kind of good enough, and kind of just throws things everywhere.
Yeah.
And while entertaining to watch, I can see it being quite frustrating for people that want to use the Allay in any kind of specific way.
Yeah, if it needs to be more precise for people to really get the mileage they want out of it, and have it be a useful thing as far as technical stuff goes, without you having to put like a whole pad of hoppers around something that you want it to collect for you.
Yeah, because the idea of the Allay bringing it to the note block, but then spraying the items anywhere in the near vicinity, you can't put things next to one another. Like, you're going to have Allays coming up to 2 note blocks, and like they're going to miss, and you're going to have a filter system anyways. Like, well, then what's the point? If you have to filter the items that the Allays are bringing in, then you're kind of just, I don't know, I feel like you're kind of creating more work for yourself. The fact that you'd have to constantly ping the note block as well, because the Allay forgets the note block after like 30 seconds, it kind of, to me, defeats the work that's gone into making the Allay be an appealing mob. So like, it flies around, it's cute, it makes little cute noises, which was hard to hear when I was watching, but like, often the streams are ducked and stuff. But the fact that you'd probably want to have this 15 plus blocks away from you if you're in your main base is probably true, because you just don't want to listen to the dings of the note blocks. And the Allay doesn't register the note block unless it makes a noise. So you can't mute it with wool and have it activate and have the Allay still go to it. And the Allay has to hear some sort of note come out of it. So that to me is I don't mind the mechanic. I just feel like the fact that it forgets after 30 seconds, like, well, that's not horribly useful, you know?
Yeah.
I know that building a clock and adding some player activity and things like that do create more gameplay around that, but I just kind of wonder whether it could be a longer interval, or if it would be something else that you could have to still do, like something to still entice the Allay, but maybe even if it was silent, maybe that's a good way to go. I don't know. The last thing is their speed. They take their sweet time when they're moving around, which in some cases might be a bug. Like, I saw some situations where like the Allay would pick up an item and go in the exact opposite direction of the note block for like 10 or 15 blocks before turning around and coming back. It would still do its job, but it was like it was the epitome of like a 6-year-old dawdling on the way to school. You know, it was just kind of like, oh, look, a tree. It's a nice tree. And then it would just turn around and do what it was supposed to do. And so there are some personality traits there, which is kind of cute, but I don't know if it's intentional, so I don't want to come down on it too hard. But Cubfan, when I was watching his video, he was really testing it. It's like, okay, let me play Minecraft like I'm on Hermitcraft. I'm trying to get some stuff done. I'm running around like a crazy bat, and the Allay just couldn't keep up.
Yeah.
There was some technical stuff in terms of how the Allay was tagged when you're using it in creative mode versus if it was a survival situation.
Right.
Whereas they would just despawn or not follow or forget their commands, versus in survival, they would follow him, but it would be so far behind that he was worried he was losing it. And if this was a real survival situation, these are so rare in the world that if you have 1 or 2 of these, you don't want to be constantly looking over your shoulder like, okay, you're 100 blocks behind. Are you going to make it? Like, is something going to attack you between now? Like, do I have to like sneak for you to keep up to me? So while I like the concept of the Allay, right now it doesn't feel super useful for the players that are going to be excited to use it for sorting non-stackable items, for helping them clean up after something, using them in farms, or even something as simple as like, it would be cool to have Allays just constantly taking a couple of items back and forth in your storage room just for some atmosphere, you know, like just having little fairies like putting away your stuff, not of any real function, but because they have to be constantly dinging, you know, note blocks, or it just like it limits what you can do with them, even if you want to treat them as like an RP experience.
Yeah. I'm hoping that this is a kind of situation where they haven't made the Allay absolutely everything everybody wants, or that like, at least technical players want yet. so that it doesn't feel like when they come to balance stuff, they're just nerfing it beyond all usefulness, right? Like, I kind of hope they're approaching this from the bottom up instead of from the top down in that respect, and saying, like, okay, we're going to start out by maybe having a set of general mechanics that feel better if you're a casual player and you're taking things a little bit slower paced, but maybe let's kind of fine-tune some of that stuff later so that it becomes a little bit more dialed in for what technical players really think it will be useful for. I think it's really difficult because you don't want this thing to be the new catch-all solution to everything storage, right? Like, the idea is that it has its usefulness, but it doesn't just straight up replace a lot of the other systems that players have already spent a lot of time working on. So it's a difficult balancing act. And once again, I don't envy Mojang the job that they have to make sure that the Allay is valuable to players, but still not something that replaces everything else players would be doing with storage to begin with.
How do you feel about the look of the Allay, like how it looks, how it moves, the model, that kind of stuff?
I think it's cool. I think it's nice, just to have it be a counterpart to the Vex. And it could have a more unique style of its own, but I think they're still trying to keep it within the feel of existing Minecraft stuff that there feels like there is precedent for already. They've had some pretty original designs with, like, the glare, I feel like, is one that wasn't necessarily related to anything that already existed in Minecraft. But then the copper golem would have been like a shrunk down iron golem, effectively. Like, there's a lot of similarity between the two, even as far as the name and the metallic element to it. So I think the Allay is kind of a happy medium between those. It's sort of like being the light version of the Vex still makes a good deal of sense to me. How about you? Are you kind of, on the fence about the design?
Well, it's a minor thing because I understand what they're trying to do with the combination of, where they're found in the woodland mansions, how they sort of look like nice Vex, or maybe what the Vex used to be before they were corrupted by illagers. Like, I get that. I just thought, especially after watching The Secrets of Minecraft, the Allay, a little fun video on YouTube this past week, and seeing the original, almost looks like a little ghost with tentacles, or like a little floaty octopus that would fly around. That to me feels, I don't know why it feels more Minecraft. I guess it's because it sort of looks like a slime with tentacles, it reminds me a little bit of stuff that you might see in Minecraft Dungeons, actually. And I feel like that might have been a fun way to go. And to poke a little bit back at the render distance, in our pre-show conversation about Pokemon, Hoppip and Chikorita, I hope I'm pronouncing those right.
Sounds right to me. Yeah.
Are two Pokemon that have like propellers on their heads. And the speed issue I was talking about before, I think could be changed up a little bit by if the Allay moved around more like a hummingbird, where it would be flitting from location to location, or still being cute. I think is it Nico? Is that the name of the hummingbird from Pocahontas, the Disney film?
I haven't seen Pocahontas for the longest time, so I can't remember.
Nico's the raccoon. I think Flit or Flick is the hummingbird. Anyway, cute character, moves faster than snot, on screen. But I think that could be kind of fun, especially if you had something unique. Like, we have weird looking things like, oh gosh, I'm blanking on the name of the lava character that we can ride on. What's it called?
Strider.
Strider, thank you.
Yeah.
Professional Minecraft podcaster for the win. So the Strider, weird, unique, and cool and fun, and has some functionality. And I kind of feel like you could have, like, maybe it's a little propeller that the Allay sits on, or maybe its ears or wings spin around on top of its head. I kind of feel like there could be something a little bit more unique. But like I said, I understand how they're trying to, like, maybe make it look like a Vex. So I get that.
Yeah, I still need to get some decent hands-on time with the Allay myself. I haven't really played around with it yet, even when it came to Bedrock, so definitely something I need to catch up with this week. And thankfully, some folks in our Discord were kind of on it, and they were posting some screenshots of the changes that have been made to Ancient Cities, because I haven't had a chance to look around one of those either. And this is really where this snapshot grabbed me, because what they're doing with some of the additional rooms and structures that generate in Ancient Cities is creating areas where whatever civilization has created this ancient city in the first place, they've been doing experiments with redstone. And this ties back into something that we were talking about back in, I think, like episode 178 or something like that, about how the Jungle Temple is a neat way of teaching players about a couple of different redstone circuits. You have tripwires activating dispensers, and you have a couple of levers linked up to sticky pistons, creating this sort of secret chamber in one side of the temple. And what they've done here is they've got ways to show you how to make pulse extenders using comparators, and they've got some old school redstone which doesn't use repeaters but uses redstone torches to turn off and on sections of a circuit. They've got a series of redstone lamps to indicate when power increases and decreases through the comparator circuit. They've got something that demonstrates that redstone power doesn't travel through glass. There's a redstone and lectern interaction with I think a comparator or a repeater just like coming out of the back of a lectern into a redstone lamp. And it's really great because these are esoteric examples of how the community has been using redstone for a while, but that's all happened through experimentation, or in the case of the lectern, when it was released, a bit of player feedback and a note in a changelog that said, hey, you can use lecterns for this. But unless you know that stuff beforehand, it's very difficult to find out as a casual player and as somebody who doesn't deep dive the Minecraft wiki about all of the stuff that they find. So I think it's really cool that they've started putting in more practical examples of redstone. And down to the fact that the ancient city even had those redstone lamps that were a really cool way of showing players the interactions between sculk sensors and redstone once they're able to explore an ancient city a bit more freely. And I think they've got, both an example of redstone circuitry that players can learn from, and also it even adds lore ideas to the game. The fact that the people who built these ancient cities were, either conducting experiments with redstone to figure out how it worked, or they at least wanted to leave some practical examples around for whatever reason. And that's going to be a lot of fun speculating about exactly why they've done that.
I'm with you on the lore. I think that's really cool. And I also agree that having more redstone examples like that in the world is great. Do you think the ancient cities are the best place for that redstone showcase?
I mean, it's difficult when, yes, they, for players to find these, it may mean they have to fight their way through or sneak past one of the toughest mobs that they've added to Minecraft, but it's that sense of curiosity bringing some reward to it, right? I think it's potentially something that once players understand the warden mechanic a little bit more, then there's additional piles of wool and stuff that have been added to the ancient city, which I think will also give players more of a clue about how they're supposed to make their way around and avoid being detected. And I think some of that stuff is going to be pretty accessible once people understand what the warden does. Which it will announce to you pretty dramatically when it comes up and one-shots you with a single swing. So I think it's got potential. I do think the structures themselves, yes, like the redstone mechanisms and stuff, could be present in other structures that are slightly more friendly to the player, but then this is all stuff that the player can still find out through interacting with the community and everything else. So there's, a bit of give and take there. And if nothing else, redstone players, people who are familiar with this stuff already, will find the stuff a novelty that it's, down there in the ancient city, and some of the stuff that some of these players may even have designed back in the day are actually now present in there. Like Nembon and Panda, I think, are the people who've been working on the redstone style of things and including some of that old school redstone. And they're, redstoners and technical players from way, way back in the game's past. So very exciting to see them having their input here.
Presumably, in peaceful mode, there will not be a warden, but I'm guessing the ancient city will still spawn, because those players would still want to mess with sculk sensors and stuff.
And it's part of world generation. It's going to be a structure. So it makes sense. And if you're interested in going down there in peaceful mode and checking stuff out, then ideal as a teaching tool, really. As far as the other stuff that's in Ancient City so far, the loot is improving. Some folks did mention that they found, the treasure items that you're looking for when you go to desert temples and dungeons and stuff like that. So there are enchanted golden apples in some of them. There might be a bit of horse armor here and there. There's still some skulk blocks. There's still some, skulk sensors and things like that. You're still looking for the Swift Sneak enchanted book. I think it's getting there. But I'm still hoping for something else. And I've been saying this over and over again, but it's going to be a long wait, I think, to find out what, if anything, that reinforced deep slate frame at the center of a city does. So I'm hoping that in the meantime there is something that's going to incentivize players to go down there and look around for stuff. Swift Sneak is good. Now that I've played around with it a bit more, I do think that's something that would take me to the ancient cities, but I'm also maybe a more confident player, and I imagine a lot of people would want to stay the heck of the way from the Warden unless they had a very good reason to go there. So we'll see. We'll see if there's anything else that Mojang has in mind to add to ancient city loot.
The thing that stood out for me, it was a small note in the snapshot, but I'm excited that hopper minecarts, break the same as chest boats.
Yeah.
Now, which I think is fantastic, and that's all of the variants, like the chest minecarts and like all that kind of stuff. I think my rudimentary Redstone brain has ideas. I can only imagine what the greater Redstone community has up their sleeves.
Yeah. No, and I do think, for a start, it's going to be nice to be able to dispense those and break those automatically. That adds a little bit of variety into what you can do with them. And it's also going to be nice to not have to recraft them, because I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever taken apart a hopper minecart or a chest minecart and gone, oh, okay, well now I can put the chest down over here somewhere, and if I need a fresh minecart, I just craft a fresh minecart, because iron is relatively cheap at that point. So I don't think anybody's actually needed hopper minecarts or chest minecarts to break apart, unless in some very kind of very specific circumstances, like an adventure map or something. Who knows? But I do think it's a really good change, and also highlights the fact that is what they want chest boats to do. Because they're kind of aligning some of the other multi-part, similar things like minecarts and stuff with the idea that they break as one entity. And so that means that potentially that's a change we'll see come to Bedrock Edition, where chest boats currently break apart into boat and chest the same way minecarts have done historically. So hoping that's the case, because that means, again, more parity across the board for how we can expect these things to operate, and that means that players can potentially use them for the same things.
I just like the idea of vertically moving minecarts with hoppers in them without having to, you can put them into an elevator or break them into something, and or, as we mentioned earlier, if the Allay becomes a bit more useful as a non-stackable item, the hopper minecart is something that the Allay could move for you. There's definitely some potential there for sure. I'm curious about your thoughts on wool blocks being the block that you have to use to mute a note block. Do you think that there might be some frustrated builders out there who want to stop note blocks from making noises with other things rather than having to use wool?
I kind of think that's... I can think of a handful of places that I've used them that would be kind of it'd be kind of an inconvenience, an aesthetic compromise to some of the stuff that I have built recently. I've definitely got a couple of note blocks that I'm using to activate my my shulker unloader, where I'm kind of just grabbing another shulker box full of contents out of my storage system overflow. I tap a note block to do that. Note blocks are useful as inputs for any system that you want to activate with an observer, because they only change the observer once instead of... Typically, Redstone components have an on and an off state, and if you have both of those happen in short succession, then that pulses an observer twice. So people use note blocks for that a lot, so that you can just right-click on a note block, it tunes the note block, that's a block state change, observer only picks it up once, so you get one pulse instead of two. Personally, I think that's a matter of convenience for what you can do with note blocks, and as far as designing stuff around that goes, it's not going to be the biggest pain in the butt. It will be a period of adjustment, I think, but it's not going to be the worst thing, and I can understand why they're doing it. For consistency with hey, wool mutes sound. That's something you need to internalize if you're interacting with the Warden stuff and skulk sensors and everything else. So note blocks being added to that with wool around them, it kind of makes sense to me.
So tell us about your experience with the April Fool's snapshot.
Oh boy. So This is a lot of fun. Yeah, we could have made this into a big discussion topic, and it's kind of prompted our discussion topic for this week, but I'll say a little bit here up front. So I had no idea what they had done going into this. I got invited to join Ulraf, Cub, and Bruno before they had published the Snapshot changelog, and basically as soon as the Snapshot was out, we went live and jumped into a multiplayer world Ulraf had set up where we could all play the game one block at a time. And the first thing I noticed was I don't have a hotbar anymore. Like, there's no hunger, it was just hearts on the screen, and it turned out that a couple of the other UI elements had been moved around. But you broke a block, you held it basically directly in front of you with both your hands, and you couldn't break or pick up another block until you had put that block down somewhere else. You couldn't open your inventory, there was no E, you couldn't drop the item with Q. Instead, you either placed it, or if you right-click, you throw it. And so item yeeting was part of the changelog, and that's basically what they did, right? So the cool part about this was that basically every block became like a falling block, in the same way that, like, you know, you can launch a block of sand with a slime block contraption, for example, right?
Right.
It was basically like players were doing that all of the time. And so Olaf said, okay, let's build a house. And so we all started punching down the nearest trees and throwing wood blocks in towards the area where we wanted to build a house, and then one of us was hanging back to, like, arrange it into a rough box. And we could only handle one block at a time until I discovered that the offhand still worked. So you could technically carry a second block basically like on one side of you, and then you could pick up a second block, and then you could throw whatever was in your main hand, switch the offhand block back to the main hand, throw that, and yeah, like, you could do a couple of bits and pieces that worked around the one block at a time system. It was also the case that if a block, like, was thrown at you, and you could actually apparently left-click it out of the air. You could basically catch stuff that was thrown at you. But if you weren't quick enough to do that, or if the server lag didn't allow for it, the block hit you, and it attached itself to your head. So later on, we were trying to carry like 3 things each by having one thing in the offhand, one thing in your main hand, and one thing on your head. And that was like, your inventory was 3 blocks, basically. So it wasn't quite one block at a time by that point, but that felt like, you know, we'd explored it to the extent of what we were what it was possible to do. You can also, what it's talking about with, like, we've implemented wrestling moves to help you move mobs around. You could pick up basically any mob and hold it above your head. And that included hostile mobs, although I don't recommend doing it with creepers because they do still blow up. I also don't recommend doing it with piglins. But zombies, when they're riding you, couldn't attack you. And so we could run around basically left-clicking on all of the mobs and stacking them up on top of us in like a tower, and then you could just throw them all at once. And so when it got to nighttime and we didn't have any beds because we hadn't found sheep, and we didn't even know how to craft stuff at that point without the inventory being there, we ended up just throwing all of the mobs into the sea, which was a really funny solution. But yeah, eventually we worked through a few of the mechanics. Ulraf kind of hinted that crafting was a possibility, but we just wouldn't be able to do it yet because we couldn't make our own crafting tables. He did show us that fire and placing stuff around fire was now the way to smelt stuff. Like, you can't interact with anything that has a GUI. A furnace wouldn't be helpful. We couldn't craft a furnace to begin with. So you throw gravel on the ground, and some of the flint from the gravel basically sparks up a fire on anything nearby that is flammable. And it turned out that you could also pick up the fire. So that was another bizarre revelation when Ulraf suddenly had the fire block like in his hands, still burning. But you could throw that down anywhere, and if you brought sand from a beach, if you brought ores that you'd managed to, you know, punch your way through, because basically everything had silk touch at that point. Like, you could, if you broke a block, you collected that specific block. It wasn't like stone broke down into cobblestone anymore. You were still picking up full blocks of natural stone. So we brought sand over to this fire, and placing the sand blocks around a fire while it was still burning turned them into glass after a couple of seconds. And so now our house had windows, and it was made entirely out of logs. And then we decided we should go and explore a little bit more. So eventually we found a crafting table in a structure that had one. So in this case, we found a pillager outpost that had a crafting table in one of the tents. And it turns out that crafting had to be done by throwing one of the items that you wanted to craft with onto the crafting table. So you couldn't just place it there. You actually had to use the kind of the kinetic falling, throwing mechanics in order to craft stuff. So throwing a log at a crafting table would turn it into a plank. And it was just one plank. It didn't break down into 4. It turned out that the amount of blocks you put in was exactly the amount of blocks that you took out again, which is really weird to get used to, but it meant that when we were throwing logs at the crafting table, we were only getting 1 plank each time. But then when we decided to build, we decided to make more crafting tables, we kind of arranged 3 planks in an L shape around the crafting table, threw the 4th plank in so it lands on the crafting table, and the crafting table turns all 4 of those planks into 4 crafting tables. So it turns out that the way the crafting works is like blocks in equals blocks out. When we wanted to craft a bed using 3 wool and 3 wood, we got 6 beds out of that because they just replaced the block space that the previous ingredients were taking up. And so a lot of the crafting in it became much more about like material conservation than it did about just getting stuff out of the way so you could put it in your inventory. And it's something I realized later. If you're talking about resource blocks in this game, if you throw a block of iron onto the crafting table, you get 1 iron ingot back because it's only 1 block that you've thrown on there, which seems a little bit weird until you realize that when you put 9 iron ingots in the crafting table formation, you get 9 blocks of iron out of that. and it doesn't break the game at all, because any of those 9 blocks that you throw back onto the crafting table to craft it back into ingots, you only get 1 ingot back. And so it preserves the amount of materials, but it's almost like in reverse, so that the iron ingots are the resource block now, not the block of iron. It's very weird, and it took a while to get used to, but I'm honestly going to spend a bit more time in the snapshot and make a few more videos from it this week, because it's like playing a different game. Like, every time they do something wacky like this with Minecraft, the same was true of the Infinity Snapshot, where suddenly every dimension that you would travel to was made out of different materials. It changes the way you think about resources, because suddenly the stuff that you're used to being rare is abundant, suddenly the stuff that you're used to being abundant is nowhere. And I always find that treating each of these as a new experience, as though you're playing Minecraft for the first time again, is really the way to go into it. And so I've challenged myself to like play a little bit of what I think of as survival Minecraft using these new mechanics. How difficult does it become to build a decent looking starter house when you have to work with the materials this way? You can't gather a ton of wood from somewhere and bring it to where you need to go. You have to basically use the resources from the area around you, and it becomes more and more difficult to go out and get trees and that kind of thing. I'm having a bit of fun with it so far. It's a lot to take in, and the fact is it's there in the launcher forever now. You can still play old April Fool's snapshots, so it's definitely possible for you to play this whenever you want to in future. It's just kind of hilarious that that was their April Fool's thing this year, but I do recommend it. I think it's a neat, refreshing way to think about Minecraft, and we'll get more into that in our main discussion a bit later.
And like I said early on, I think it's great that Mojang uses April Fools to fool around and do some fun things and experiment and things like stuff that they could never really work into the game, because 1, it might mislead players, and 2, it's almost like a game jam. You know, like I feel like their April Fool's stuff is usually like, well, here's a bunch of stuff that we have as ideas, but they don't work in the game. But it doesn't mean that they're bad ideas or that they're not worth exploring. And I love that they use the April Fool's opportunity to craft something like that.
It's funny you should say that, because Ulraf was explaining a little bit on the stream about where some of this stuff came up in the first place. And what they do every so often is they do a game jam internally within Mojang. They call it Mojam, where they just mess around with mechanics like this. And they make stuff as broken as it needs to be to just demonstrate the concept. And they basically built all of this stuff on a specific branch of Minecraft that they apparently internally referred to as Minecraft 3 because it was so advanced. But then the ideas all emerge in April Fool's snapshots like this, and I think they've been keeping track of a bit of player reaction to some of this stuff to think, is any of this actually worth including in future mechanics? Like, are people interested in the kind of stuff that the ideas that this brings up? And so, yeah, potentially there is a chance that some of these mechanics might make their way back around to new editions in future if they're particularly popular with players. But yeah, Ulraf was saying that a lot of this stuff came up when they just thought, there was some really weird arbitrary decisions that were made about Minecraft in the distant past, like all of the items should stack to 64, that when you break a block, it basically turns into a smaller version of the block that you can pick up. And, I referred back to, there's a really great video demonstrating this on YouTube, which I'll have to try and find. Back in the day, in like the in-dev days of Minecraft, back before things like furnaces had barely been cemented as a concept, and that's how you smelted a lot of stuff, it was possible to make chainmail armor and I think glass by throwing the items required to make them into a lava source, and instead of destroying the items, it would just smelt them. And so there's basically a video out there somewhere of somebody throwing a ton of sand into a lava source, and it turns into glass like popcorn. And then you just break the block nearby so that you don't have to get into the lava yourself, and you just get close enough that the item entities magnetize to you and you pick them all up. And there's just interesting ways in which Minecraft could have gone if those mechanics were never really, changed and developed over time into the Minecraft we know today.
What do you say we move on to some junk mail?
Yes, let's do that.
So if you'd like to email the show, you can send your message to spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. Please remember to indicate if you are a patron or not. It helps us file the emails, as well as keep your emails short and to the point. First email is from Yuri, solving loud problems. Hello there, Johnny and Joel. I was thinking about the functionality of wool and skulk sensors, with wool completely blocking Minecraft vibration from reaching the sensors. This mechanic could be really useful for one of the problems that Minecraft players have had to deal with for the longest time: loud sounds. Those farms with a lot of pistons making loud, annoying noises that you have to build far away from your base, or turn off your block sounds in the settings, which breaks the game immersion. What if there was a block in the game, or just regular wool block, if that makes sense, that was soundproof? It would block the sound from everything behind it. Like tinted glass, an area has to be fully covered to be completely silent. Or maybe we can make some use of the 3D directional audio you've been talking about to make a dynamic sound system. Do you think this idea could be implemented in vanilla Minecraft? Thank you for the amazing show. My name has been Yuri, and everything I do online, including, force a habit. Yuri blew himself up because he was frustrated with the annoying nether portal sound next to his base.
Well, we've all been there with nether portals in particular, so yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The problem with nether portals, though, is that for your suggestion to work, you would have to completely block in your nether portal with wall blocks, and that makes it quite difficult to get to. You basically have to install a noisy piston door just so you could get into the wall box that contains your nether portal at that point. So I do feel like this is a cool idea. Like, on the one hand, I'm totally on board. Like, it'd be great to have something that includes, irritating sound effects in Minecraft. And there are definitely some mods and data packs out there that add volume sliders for individual sounds, or you quiet them permanently. In the case of Vanilla Tweaks' quieter nether portals, they have a few other quieter resource packs that just dial down the volume on those sounds. I think implementing that kind of stuff in Minecraft mechanically, for whatever reason, doesn't quite feel like the right way to do it. And I have a hard time exactly justifying why. Joel, do you have any thoughts on this that maybe put it in better words than I can find?
So again, I like the idea, especially the comparison to tinted glass, right? Because like tinted glass lets you see through it, but it blocks light. And maybe wool and glass together could combine into insulated glass, which would let you see through it, but then also block sound.
I mean, that's an interesting concept. I'm trying to think of like real world equivalents, and it's basically like double glazing or whatever, right? That has like a vacuum in between it, sort of. And I don't know if that's quite what we think of there, but like it worries me on account of the idea that Minecraft has to be like relatively low tech, and I kind of wonder, how is the player really capable of making some glass that cannot have sound travel through it. Like that
Yeah.
feels almost too mechanical of a process. And I know, we can craft beacons and stuff like that, so suspend your disbelief only as much as you want to. But I do think it feels a little bit too high tech in a way. Maybe that's what's feeling wrong about it for me.
So to go back and even just use wool blocks, I think they've done a really good job of illustrating how wool muffles sound in the ancient cities. They've given you stacks. There's paths of wool around the outside that kind of, give you the idea that you should maybe do that. And so maybe you don't have to encase something 360 degrees, but maybe 320 degrees. Like if you had all four walls of your house minus the door made out of wool, or because wool is not the most aesthetic block that everybody wants to build with, maybe if it was inside the walls. Like imagine the walls of your structure are 3 blocks thick. You've got whatever you want on both sides, inside and outside for decoration, but inside you've got wool. And if that was the case where it would then block most of the sound or all of the sound from the environment, again, I don't know how that would work from a programming mechanic. I don't know if it's possible in vanilla Minecraft, but the idea, especially when you get into something like, mini games or crafted player experience, like imagine you're, doing an April Fool's prank on someone, and not only do you drop them into a room that is all one color, but it's completely devoid of sound.
Yeah.
Right? Like just dead silence, or dead silence except for the one thing you want them to hear, which is a wither skeleton that maybe you're maybe chasing them or maybe not chasing them, just rattling around in a cage. Like just stuff like that that's very distinctive to players, I think could be an interesting thing to explore. But I'm with you on the fact that, like data packs that allow individual sliders is probably more the way to go, because then you could just control it once, set it to where you want it, and then don't worry about it again.
Yeah, I think it also feels a little bit like overkill to have a solution like this when the current solution is just walk away a few blocks. Like I think with certain sound sources like note blocks and jukeboxes, you can hear them from a much wider range than you can things like pistons, and that's by design. Like you're supposed to be able to hear a note block or a jukebox from further away. And there are some instances in which I think it'd be useful to keep a few pistons quiet, but from a design perspective, I don't know if I really want to plan for those things by saying, well, now I also have to go and get like 4 stacks of wool to surround this noisy piston mechanic. And I think it's a good trade-off in a way that occasional noise pollution happens for the convenience that noisy contraptions provide. In a way I like the idea, but it also, I think, maybe would have to be part of an overhaul of Minecraft's sound system in general that allowed it to feel more realistic. And as BreadTab is saying in our live chat, sound mechanics in Minecraft are very unrealistic. They don't follow the conventions of typical physics at all, because you can hear a piston buried, through several layers of stone and grass and stuff below you. And to implement a more realistic sound system in Minecraft, it'd almost be like implementing realistic lighting. It'd be like ray tracing. You've got to figure out which surfaces the sound is echoing off, what it's absorbed by, what it's refracted by. And I think at that stage it just becomes far too complex a system for vanilla Minecraft, at least, to handle. Maybe in future we start to see an immersive sound thing pop up in the same way that RTX has been treated, and maybe then we start to realize perhaps why immersive sound isn't part of vanilla Minecraft to begin with.
What's next in the mailbag?
Our next email comes in from Mechmorphic with the subject of item teleportation and transportation. Hi, Johnny and Joel. I've been watching DocM77 on Hermitcraft as of late, and, as you've mentioned on the show, he has been messing with some game exploits that allow him to teleport items from his inventory to a chest in the spawn chunks from anywhere in the world. What if there was an endgame mechanic that allowed you to pair 2 chests together so they have the same inventory but exist in separate parts of the world? This would allow you to place items into one chest while hoppers could either drain or replenish items from the paired chest elsewhere in the world, and breaking either chest would unpair them. I know there would undoubtedly be some technical difficulties with loading chunks across the world, which might prevent Mojang from ever considering such a feature. Does this idea break Minecraft, or solve long-distance bulk item transportation? Mechmorphic fell asleep crying because he couldn't program a mod to add this to Minecraft. And I'll take the mod question out of the way right now. Ender storage. If you're okay with modded Minecraft, I recommend Ender storage. We'll have a link to that in our show notes if we can include that. It's to the FTB wiki, which explains it. And yeah, ender storage is the one I've talked about previously, where you have a series of ender chests. There are color combinations that you can add to the top of them in like 3 separate colored strips, and anything with the same combination links to any other ender chest of the same combination, and I believe that allows for stuff like hopper interaction and stuff as well. But yeah, the first thing I thought of when we read this email was, with the exception of the hopper interaction, you're describing ender chests. I mean, I get what you mean. The ability to have multiple ender chests, essentially, and to have every player be able to interact with the same inventory instead of having it tied to player data. Of course, it'd be useful. The question really is, does this feel like Minecraft? Does this feel like something that Minecraft would do if the technical coding implications and the chunk loading stuff wasn't a problem? Do you think that's feasible? Do you think that's something that we might end up seeing in Minecraft, theoretically?
So I wonder if it's something that could be implemented that might end up with some restrictions that could still make it very useful, but might make it more of a mid-game, sort of situation, or maybe even end-game. So if it was possible, what I thought of was respawn anchors. And maybe you could tie, instead of making an ender chest, you could make a respawn chest or something along those lines. I don't know what the crafting recipe would look like, but my thought was that it would not be something very easy to do off the start. Also, maybe it's only something that works in the Nether. Like maybe you can't transport items like this in the overworld, but you have to use the Nether, which could be cool, because if you can transport them distance in the Nether and then somehow get them back to the overworld, then you've transported them even farther, right? It just restricts you to doing it in a dangerous place. The other thing I thought of in terms of, time in versus reward out that we talk about a lot in the show, what if it's not free? Like, what if in order for these, we'll call them, respawn chests to teleport items, they have to be powered by something, in the same way that you'd run a bamboo farm to power your super smelter, right? Like, it's a great thing in the game, but it takes a lot of work to set up. What if you had to put something into these respawn chests to then continue the item transport, like redstone dust, glowstone dust, spider eyes? My brain goes to something renewable, otherwise it's going to defeat the purpose altogether.
Yeah.
But if you had a witch farm constantly pumping out redstone that was then fueling your respawn chests that were constantly setting items from that witch farm across, to your base, like that would be kind of cool and not an easy thing to set up. Like that would require quite a lot of time and calculation. And maybe there's also a distance limit. Like maybe you can't go clear across the world, but you have to go within 16 chunks, which is still, that's not a small distance,
Yeah, I think tying it to the mechanics of the Nether and the 1-to-8 ratio that happens with Nether portal transportation and stuff like that makes a lot of sense. I do like the idea of players having a means other than just fast player transport or mob transport through the Nether to make sense for stuff like that. And I believe there are even technical players out there who are using Nether portals to transport items, stuff like that anyway. Like, I've seen piglin bartering setups on the Nether roof that eject their contents via Nether portal into the overworld, and maybe that needs to be loaded on both ends by a player in order for it to function, but I think it's still kind of an interesting concept in the first place. I agree that there needs to be some sort of trade-off for how convenient the mechanic is, like something that you're fueling it with in the same way that you are a respawn anchor or something like that, because it seems too convenient otherwise. You can bypass a lot of stuff by just having inventory from one place turn up in another place. You can avoid any kind of sorting system, issues with long hopper chains or something, just by having the contents of a chest at this coordinate warp to the contents of a chest in the other coordinate. So I think there's a few things in it that are, if not game breaking, then at least they invalidate the efforts of a lot of people who've been doing other stuff in the technical community that does things like this already. And I kind of wish at times that I was more involved with that kind of community so that I understood their attitudes to it, because I've definitely seen some occasions on which changes like this have been embraced by the technical community, and others where they've thought, well, that just eliminates all of the hard work we put into designing this or that in the distant past.
Yeah. You could also limit the throughput, like what if it's only one item at a time? I mean, that still means you can put a shulker box loader on either side of it and have like a shulker box go through that's full of stone. But if it was only one item at a time, that would also create like, well, this is not going to be as fast as one of those giant, Psycraft contraptions that's moving thousands of items a minute, across great distances. But for the player that doesn't have those abilities as a Redstone, engineer, they could build this thing in game and at least move a little bit of stuff,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's potential for stuff like this. I'm just not sure if it's the direction that they'd end up taking it in Minecraft. Fun to speculate about, though. And thinking about that, this is where our main topic comes in, because prompted by this April Fool's snapshot, and what we were saying earlier about how certain ideas used to be part of Minecraft that no longer are, or if we didn't end up with a system of items shrinking down to be put in your player's inventory, what would Minecraft look like? I kind of thought it'd be fun to have a chat about what established Minecraft mechanics could have changed the game we know today if they had headed in slightly different directions. And to help us come up with a couple of prompts for this, because it's really difficult to do this kind of retrospective thinking, we're going to be referring a little bit to the Java Edition Removed Features article from the Minecraft Wiki, because this has a couple of really great examples that I think could have, if they had remained in the game, been really influential in how the game ended up being developed. The first of which is player stats. So basically near the top of the page it says, in an early in-dev version, when the player opened the inventory screen, you saw your player name and 3 stats, which were attack, defense, and speed. The values for all of these were set to 100. They existed only briefly, and then they were just removed because they were presumably placeholders for something that never ended up being implemented. So imagine Minecraft with player stats that you had to build, similar to an RPG or something like that. And I find that this functionality is actually fairly common in harder mod packs like RLcraft, where they exist to basically prevent players from leaping ahead in the tech tree. You have to be like level 5 before you can use a flint and steel or whatever. And I'm wondering what place that kind of stuff might have in vanilla Minecraft. Like, could it be tied to advancements, or would that railroad players into following a progression rather than embracing the sandbox nature and just kind of going off and doing whatever? So, like, you've played a few games that presumably have, like, stats and stuff. You played World of Warcraft. I imagine there's a decent sort of stat system tied into that. Can you see anything like that ever working in Minecraft?
The example that I see, and I don't remember the name of the mod, but it's something to do with your tools, where like the more you mine with your pickaxe, the more experience you get as a miner, and therefore you can apply those features. So rather than rather than the RNG of the enchanting table trying to get, haste or not haste, that's a beacon thing, but like trying to get, efficiency and unbreaking and things on your items, you would put in the work. And then you would have points that you can then assign. It's like, well, I want to give these points to this pick, so it's my fast pick, or I want this to be the pick that I can then use to mine different items. Like I need a pick level 20 before I can mine obsidian, that kind of a thing. I can see that being a way to slow down some of the game rush that happens early Minecraft. When people want to go straight to the end. And I like the idea of leveling things up, because my World of Warcraft days, really you'd end up just buying something in the auction house. Most of the time I was looking for aesthetics, but there would be some things that you'd want to kind of like pair together. I really like the idea of the sets of gear that you would get, because like there'd be something very specific for, like, say, my paladin, and the gear would be beneficial to just the paladin. It would have a specific look to it. So if you like the look, all the better. But usually what it meant is that if you got the whole set, then they would kind of buff one another. So if you ended up having like a set of stats, or stats from, I guess it's similar to Minecraft Dungeons. Like if you want to play as a wizard, you pick up trinkets and you use armor that benefits your abilities as a wizard, or ranged attacks and things like that. Vice versa, if you want to be tanky in the game, that could be kind of fun in Minecraft too. Like if you were picking up enchantments, or you were putting in experience on your boots because you'd rather be fast and shoot mobs from a distance, or are you going to put more time and energy into your chest plate and your sword so that you can just walk up to anything and bop it on the head and move on? I think that adds a bit more to the sandbox if there's enough variety, right?
Yeah.
Rather than just a one track.
Yeah, I think the problem with it is the emergence of a meta that usually ends up happening when it comes to this stuff,
true.
and like players finding the one path that they think is the best to go down, and then having to rebalance the game through all its many iterations since in dev when these stats even popped up in the first place to account for the idea that players have to have these skills that develop and what that means for them, right? I feel like mechanics like that for a sandbox game like Minecraft have their potential. I mean, if you take a look at Pixark is another game that I've played, and Ark Survival Evolved has a similar system, I believe, where as you accumulate experience, that's how you unlock crafting recipes, right? So you level up in certain fields, and that allows you to unlock crafting recipes or abilities that, you can branch it into a skill tree from there, and yeah, you end up with a bunch of different abilities there. But yeah, I think in Minecraft that becomes another slightly too bulky system, unless it replaces something that we already know about, like enchanting or like status effects. If you have a more permanent haste buff, or if you have a haste ability, if you've maxed out some kind of mining stat, then yeah, maybe it becomes beneficial, but then it's less possible to become a well-balanced player of the kind of stuff that I like to play, where I'm trying to do everything in the game. Like it becomes a lot more of a difficult concept to balance for every single play style that's out there. And had it been implemented early enough, might have completely changed what we think of as Minecraft's play styles now. So it's one of those things that's really difficult to imagine, had it been invented then and developed into a bigger system, whether that would have retained the player base in the same way that Minecraft has for being a sandbox game that's a lot more open.
I err on the side of the openness being the better decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's so difficult to say, but I want to say with the examples we've got here, they have mostly made the right decisions about all of these. And that really ties into the next thing I had in mind, which was health and hunger. One of the things that I noticed during the April Fool's snapshot was that health just slowly regenerated over time regardless, because the items that we were collecting, you couldn't eat any food, except for one occasion in which Ulraf had programmed in an Easter egg where only the person with the username Ulraf was able to eat bamboo, based on like an in-joke that him and Bruno had, which was very cheeky of him to do. But yeah, the fact that you couldn't eat anything, hunger had basically been eliminated from the mechanics that you needed, and the only thing you could do with like a chicken was you threw it like a frisbee because it had no value and couldn't really be used to craft anything. So yeah, I wonder what would have happened if health worked the same way as it used to back in the day, when in earlier versions of Minecraft, when hunger wasn't implemented yet, which I think happened at the same time as sprinting because of how closely tied sprinting is to the hunger system. Health used to be directly healed by food. So without hunger and natural regeneration really being part of the system, you had to kill a pig, cook a pork chop, and that was how you got back the majority of your health hearts. And I kind of wonder if hunger had never been implemented, how things would have changed, because I think we'd probably have ended up with a lot more ways to gain either more hearts or temporary health, because it'd be much harder to regain health around tougher enemies. That passive regeneration mechanic that happens when you've eaten recently and you have high saturation still allows your health to refill in the background so that you don't have to constantly eat while you're attacking stuff. And I feel like without that, we'd have to have some other way of artificially maybe increasing our health so that we could take on any kind of tougher enemies. And imagining stuff like the Warden, which is, you know, pretty hefty as it is right now, being implemented in a system where you couldn't heal via hunger and regeneration, you'd have to heal through just chomping down a bunch of pork chops. Kind of difficult to imagine stuff like the Warden existing at that stage.
I agree. And I was actually thinking about this the other day. I was playing Tunic. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's like a top-down RPG.
Kind of Fox character, Zelda-like. Yeah.
Fox character. Yeah. Cute game. Really beautiful. Some interesting little mechanics. It's a lot of puzzle solving, so it can be a little frustrating sometimes. However, the most frustrating thing about it, probably because I spend so much time playing Minecraft, is that I much prefer the 10 hearts of health and the auto regen in Minecraft. I can still die in Minecraft. Like, I can still get my butt handed to me by a couple of piglins and a slime or a magma cube if I'm in the wrong spot at the wrong time. But I find that with Tunic, you essentially have like 2 to 3 hits and you're dead. You do not regen health on your own. You have the ability to have potions. You can only hold 1 at first, but you can increase your ability to hold like 3 potions. None of them, even all 3 of them, won't get you up to 100% health. And yet you have enemies that will take you down by a third or more, and they're not even bosses. So if you're doing like a boss run for like the 3rd or 4th time, and you happen to screw up on fighting a basic enemy and they hit you, you feel like just resetting and starting over again, which isn't fun, because you're like, I no longer have all of my health. That means I'm way less likely to survive this boss who hits like a truck, so like the mechanic becomes, you just can't get hit at all ever. And I prefer the Minecraft stuff where like you can't get hit too many times in a row. Like, if you're in a real bind, you'll die. But if you're handling one, character at a time, one bad guy at a time, you're probably going to be okay. Now, in my case, I almost died to a spider this weekend because I was inside. I was doing a lot of running around back and forth to my storage, and I was doing a lot of up and down, a lot of jumping off of roofs and things, building chimneys. And so I had like, my hunger was not happening. I was down to like 3 hearts or 2 hearts or something like that. And I was outside at nighttime because I didn't realize it had gotten dark. And a spider came and started attacking me. And like, I just was off on my rhythm about when to hit the spider. And I was like, wow, I've got like 1.5 hearts here. I need to back away before I lose 137 levels in my 4-year-old Minecraft server to a spider.
Yeah.
So like, I'm not the best at combat in the game. I'm not coming at it from that level, but I definitely prefer the fact that all I had to do was run, eat something, gain about 1.5 hearts, from that golden carrot, and watch it start to regen a little bit, and then all of a sudden have a sigh of relief and not have to worry too much, right? So
yeah,
I think they struck a balance in Minecraft.
Yeah, I sort of wonder if the hunger system was never implemented, what they then end up doing with food. Like, I think because it allows food to expand a bit more if you have the hunger and saturation mechanic, and there's a bit of a trade-off there. You're not just adding foods for the sake of it. And I was wondering if they might have introduced stuff like status effects earlier in development. Like, if you ended up with not just food giving you, a health regeneration or whatever, like effectively eating a pork chop was like a potion of healing, but if different types of food started to give you status effects, and not just in the suspicious stew kind of way where it gives you 3 seconds, like if maybe food gave you a strength buff or something like that so that you were able to hit back a little harder, or if it gave you resistance so that you'd end up with better defense. And that might even have tied into the player stats idea if that was also a thing. So it does kind of make me wonder how food could have changed if health had remained the sole thing deciding whether or not your character lived and died, give or take the hunger stuff. The last thing I wanted to touch on, again, because this was prompted by the April Fool's snapshot, is not necessarily something that was ever removed from the game. In fact, it exists in a couple of really interesting ways. But I wonder if maybe the game had gone down the path of including more stuff like this, how it would have ended up. And that's multi-block crafting of the kind like the April Fool's snapshot, where we had to throw a bunch of items in together. And that's not too dissimilar from features like the Wither and like beacons, which were both added relatively early in development. They both came out in update 1.4.2, so we're talking like 8 years ago now, I think. And they're both tied to the idea of constructing something out of blocks, which either transforms or only works when it's constructed properly, like the beacons do. And you do, of course, see the same mechanics working with iron golems and snow golems, both of which are constructed out of blocks and a carved pumpkin. I think the most recent example of this is probably the Conduit, right? And so the April Fool's snapshot basically turned crafting into something like building an iron golem or a wither. And down to the point where, you know how sometimes if you're building an iron golem, if you're building it on like a plains biome or wherever, and there's one piece of grass that's occupying one of the air blocks either side of the T-shape of iron, it won't make an iron golem because there's technically a block there that it detects and goes, no, I can't put something here. The same thing was happening with crafting in the April Fool's snapshot. And it gets finicky, but at the same time, I really like how tactile it is. Like, building something like that, any kind of like multi-block construct is really interesting to me. And I'm wondering if that mechanic still feels like it has a place in Minecraft going forward, or if everything's going to be sort of one block and crafting and that kind of stuff. I understand the difficulty in providing practical examples and prompting players how to do that stuff beyond just experimenting, but we see stuff like what they're adding with Ancient Cities now, prompting players to use redstone components in certain ways. And I wonder if something like that reinforced deep slate frame in the Ancient City also has a mechanic like that in mind, where all of these blocks have to be arranged in a certain way for it to do something specific. Do you want to see more of that in Minecraft? Do you want to see multi-block crafting used in ways like that? Or do you think it's better to just have players, condense everything down into crafting systems like the crafting table or the villager workstations?
I think the crafting tables and the villager workstations are more straightforward. They certainly, you learn how to do things early on the crafting table. And I don't think there's much in game to really indicate to you how to use a beacon.
Yeah, I mean, the GUI is the tricky thing, because in the crafting table, you have a recipe book now, so crafting becomes a lot less esoteric. But with beacons, I went through this in my recent episode, actually. You're kind of prompted about what materials to use to activate the beacon there's like a list of 5 of them effectively next to that beacon slot. And that, in a way, is supposed to hint that the pyramid diagram that you see on there should be built out of blocks of those materials. Like, you make that connection, but again, it's not a connection that natively, intuitively comes to the player. I do feel like that might be something that is still passed down, the majority of it, by community knowledge, because otherwise it takes a bit of experimentation to draw those conclusions yourself. Certainly not something that you'd come to on your own immediately on seeing the beacon GUI. It's not as effective as written instructions.
And same with Snow Golem, Iron Golem, even the Wither. I know how to build them, but I'm blanking on how I learned. I'm pretty sure it was another YouTube, video, not in game. I like the idea of it, and they've done some good jobs with nether portals. Ruined nether portals now give a solid indication to the player. By the way, if you arrange obsidian in a big box, it might do something. I don't remember if or how they implemented how to construct a conduit outside of maybe the notes for the snapshots.
Yeah, no, the conduit is one of those ones that doesn't have a partly constructed version somewhere, and I think it is something that you have to learn yourself. I think that the most difficult thing to learn about conduits is the fact that you need to have a 3x3 cube of water with the conduit at its center, and that you can't activate it by placing a block of the prismarine that you use to build the frame any closer to the conduit than that. So, when you first place it, you have to place it against a block, but you're always having to break that block in order to activate the conduit, because if it's got something in the radius of that, then it's not going to activate.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think they're cool ideas. There could be, I'm not sure what you could do. I mean, there's lots of things I think as we've talked about on the show in terms of, spawn proofing areas that are greater than just the torch radius. Even things that are, beacons right now are tied to things like speed and regen and haste. So I'm just trying to think about other things that might be interesting to the player that could be fun, either areas of effect, or other mobs. I don't mind the idea of, a little bit more fantastical stuff coming in to Minecraft. Rather than having to breed animals or capture animals, it would be neat if you also had the option of, a fantastical creature. The Allay may be a little bit small, but maybe if you had something like, giving the player a mechanical hoglin to then counteract the hoglins. If you could go into a Crimson Forest and build your own, build maybe it's got iron and netherite or something in it, and then you ride a mechanical pig around that can then protect you against the ones that are trying to yeet you off the side of a cliff. Then that could be kind of cool. So I like the idea more about building things that become entities. I like the golem idea. I like because it's fantasy-esque, but it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to any one, particular IP. You know, like it just iron golems and snow golems and stuff are uniquely Minecraft, and they're fun. And I feel like there could be more stuff like that to add fun and functionality and whimsy into the game.
Yeah, I feel like most players are expected to create an iron golem just by like decorate or a snow golem rather by decorating for Christmas or something, and like they find a snow biome, they immediately try to build a snowman. And by that point, if you found out about carved pumpkins, then you know you've probably got the idea of like, let me put 2 blocks of snow and a face on the top, and then if it magically becomes a snow golem and you don't know about that, then that's kind of cool. The only place I think about multi-block kind of constructs, I typically find examples of that stuff in mod packs, and if you look at Thormcraft as an example of that, there are various like altars and things that you have to assemble in order to, you know, combine elements, do some of the more magical imbuing of artifacts and charge weapons and that kind of stuff to create something new. But that's a whole separate system, and it's being grafted onto Minecraft in a way that Minecraft likes to integrate things a bit more subtly. And I think the way it does that is by integrating them with existing systems a lot of the time. So instead of having like a whole new magic system just drop out of the sky, they kind of need to tie it to existing stuff in the game already. And so I'm not sure if that's the kind of thing that they'd ever end up considering, because that stuff just feels a little bit too out there. Like it doesn't necessarily have a foundation in too much else. But you're right. I think crafting entities by building them in the same way that we do the Wither and the Golems is a good call. I think that's potentially something that, it's a mechanic that they could maybe build on. They just have to come up with the right ideas for it, really. And much as I like the idea of Iron Hoglin, I'm curious about whether that has legs. I mean, it probably does have legs, but you know what I mean. I think that's where we'll leave it for today, though. I think we're probably going to hand this one over to the community. And if you have any ideas for maybe old mechanics in Minecraft that you feel like could have taken the game in a weird direction, and you have any other thought experiments you want to run by us, then you can, of course, send in an email to the usual address. And that's going to be where we wrap up the show. You can find more information about the show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, please consider putting some value back in. You can do that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Joining our community, pledging at any level, gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can participate in things like the live show recording, which is happening right now in our Discord, the monthly Minecraft audio hangout, which will be coming up later on this month, and we're also having a quarterly hangout soon as well. We're currently at 334 patrons, which is down 3 from last week as Patreon does its usual reshuffle, but we're still above that threshold where the monthly Minecraft audio hangout can be a thing. So thank you very much for your support, and special thanks go out to our content engineers, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, and Yitz. Thank you for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on Twitter and Instagram. Personal recommendations are by far the best way to share the podcast. Just let a friend know that they can listen on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and even YouTube. Be sure to leave a rating and a review on your favorite podcast platform. That also helps us out. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on thespawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page, and that is where you can get the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Johnny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where this week I may be spending a lot more time in the One Block at a Time Snapshot. I also stream 3 days a week on Twitch, so look out for streams Tuesday and Thursday this week. I do behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series there, and I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search. Aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Twitter and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
Everything I'm doing online, including my illustration and design portfolio, is at joelduggan.com. You can find a link to the Citadel Cafe, my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment there. We talked about Dune on the last episode. You can follow me at Joel Duggan on social media and Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I stream Friday, Saturday, and Sunday from the Citadel.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, and you can hold it all in your hands, one block at a time.